Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the English Globe. It is always a true pleasure to have you here with us, joining this space where we explore the big questions of our world. Today's episode will take us deep into one of the most urgent debates in international relations, politics, and economics. Together with my co-host, Julia, we are going to explore the battle for global power. Can the United States stop China? This is a question that shapes the 21st century.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you to all of our audience for tuning in. We always say that our discussions are not only about abstract theories or faraway policies, they are about real choices and changes that affect people's lives around the world. When we ask whether the US can stop China, we are really asking, what will the future world look like? Who will set the rules? Who will shape the economy, the technology, the culture, and even the security of nations?
This is important because for most of the last 75 years, the United States has been the central power of the global order. From the end of the Second World War until now, America's military, its economy, and its values have guided the international system. But in the last 4 decades, China has risen faster than any nation in modern history. It is no longer just a regional actor. It is now challenging U.S. influence on almost every front. This competition will affect everyone, from business leaders to students, from workers to governments.
That is why, dear listeners, we want you to stay with us today as we break this subject down into different angles. We will look at history, economics, technology, military power, alliances, and also the risks of both US and Chinese strategies. But before we begin, we would like to ask something simple of you. If you enjoy this kind of discussion, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel, The English Globe. It really helps us grow and bring these conversations to more people worldwide.
And we would love to hear from you directly. Please go to the comment section and tell us, where are you listening from today? Which country or city? And what do you think about this topic? Do you believe the United States can stop China's rise? Or do you think China's growth is unstoppable? We value your voices, because this is not only a debate between experts. It is also a conversation among global citizens who are all touched by this rivalry.
Exactly. The US-China competition is not just a story for politicians in Washington or leaders in Beijing. It affects the supply chains that decide where our clothes are made and how much they cost. It affects the technology that powers the phones in our hands. It affects the global economy that influences whether jobs are created or lost. And of course, it affects peace and stability in regions that are often far away but deeply connected to us all.
So when we open the question, can the United States stop China? We are opening a very complex, very layered debate. It is not only about whether America is stronger today, it is about whether its strategies, alliances, and leadership can adapt to new realities. It is also about whether China's rise is sustainable or whether it will face limits. These are questions that define the 21st century, just as the Cold War defined much of the 20th.
Think for a moment about how much is at stake. If the United States can maintain its leadership, the world might continue under a system that many nations are familiar with: global institutions, democratic values, and an open market economy. If China rises to the top, the system may look very different, with new norms, new standards, and perhaps less emphasis on liberal ideas. Some people see this as opportunity. Others see it as danger.
And that is why today's discussion matters so much. For every listener, whether you are in Asia, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, or the Americas, the future balance of power will shape your country's choices, opportunities, and challenges. We invite you not just to listen, but to think critically with us. Reflect on the arguments, consider the evidence, and share your perspective. This is how we learn, by hearing from people across borders and cultures.
So, dear listeners, welcome once again to the English Globe. Fasten your seatbelts for a long and deep conversation. Our journey begins now, and by the end of this episode, We hope you will not only understand the rivalry between the US and China, but also see why it is the central story of our time. And as we move through each section, remember to let us know in the comments where you are joining from and what your thoughts are. Together, let us begin.
To understand today's US-China rivalry, we first need to look back at the foundations of American power after the Second World War. In 1945, the United States emerged as the undisputed leader of the international system. Its economy was untouched by the devastation that had destroyed much of Europe and Asia. In fact, by the late 1940s, America's share of global economic output was more than 40%. Its industries produced goods for the world. Its currency became the central medium of trade, and its technological innovation led the way.
That economic advantage gave the United States the resources to build not just prosperity at home, but also influence abroad. The US dollar, backed by the Bretton Woods system, became the anchor of global finance. The Marshall Plan helped rebuild Europe, not only preventing collapse, but also tying European economies closely to American leadership. In Asia, too, Washington invested heavily in recovery and growth, creating allies in Japan, South Korea, and later Taiwan. These efforts were not acts of charity alone. They were strategic moves to secure a liberal order in which America would remain central.
Alongside economic strength came unmatched military supremacy. By the end of the war, the United States held nuclear weapons, a powerful navy, and an air force that could project power across oceans. It established permanent military bases in Europe, Asia, and later the Middle East. NATO, created in 1949, was not simply a defense alliance. It was a mechanism through which the U.S. institutionalized its role as the protector of Western democracy. No other country at that time could match the global reach of American forces or the sophistication of its technology.
But what made American hegemony unique was not only hard power, it was also the creation of institutions that set the rules of the game. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and later the World Trade Organization all carried heavy American influence. These institutions were presented as global, but they reflected US interests and values. They promoted open markets, multilateral cooperation, and norms of governance that were consistent with American ideology. Through them, Washington embedded its dominance in structures that seemed universal.
This blend of power and principles gave rise to what scholars call the liberal international order. It was not perfect. Many countries remained outside of it, and the U.S. often contradicted its own ideals. But it created a framework in which America was the central actor. Even during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union posed a serious ideological and military challenge, U.S. influence over much of the non-communist world remained secure. The Soviet bloc could not compete economically with the consumer wealth, technological dynamism, and cultural reach of the West.
If we think about moments when US power seemed completely unchallenged, two periods stand out. The first was the immediate post-war years, when America stood alone as the world's industrial giant. The second was after 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. In that decade, the 1990s, people spoke about a unipolar moment. Washington's military was unrivaled, its economy remained the largest, and its cultural products, from Hollywood films to Silicon Valley technologies, spread around the globe with little resistance. That decade shaped a belief that American dominance was permanent.
Indeed, this confidence was reinforced by wars and interventions in which the U.S. demonstrated its superiority. The 1991 Gulf War showed how advanced American military systems were compared to any other power. U.S. fighter jets, precision-guided missiles, and satellite coordination created an image of near invincibility. At the same time, the expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe and the integration of new markets into global trade deepened the reach of American influence. For many, it appeared that the U.S. was not only the strongest power, but the architect of the global future.
And let us not forget the cultural and ideological side. American universities attracted students from every continent, shaping generations of future leaders. Its media industries exported not only entertainment, but also ideas of freedom, individualism, and modern lifestyles. From jeans to jazz, from fast food to technology, American culture was everywhere. This soft power reinforced the perception that US leadership was not imposed by force alone, but also by attraction. Many young people worldwide grew up seeing America as the land of opportunity, a model to aspire to.
All of these elements, the economy, the military, the institutions, and the culture, created a foundation of hegemony. For decades, even as challenges appeared, the United States could adjust and maintain its position. The Vietnam War, the oil crises of the 1970s, or even competition from Japan in the 1980s, did not fundamentally shake its global role. Each time the U.S. adapted, recovered, and reasserted leadership. By the turn of the century, despite some doubts, it still appeared to be the indispensable power.
However, the very strength of these foundations also shaped the stage for rivalry. The institutions that served US interests also became arenas where other nations could push back. The economic system that fueled prosperity also created openings for new competitors. The culture that spread globally also provoked criticism of Western dominance. And the wars that projected strength also revealed limits, as seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. In short, US hegemony was powerful but not invulnerable. It created both stability and the seeds of future challenge.
This is why, when we speak of China's rise, we must remember the long shadow of US hegemony. China did not grow in a vacuum. It rose within an order that America had designed. Chinese factories exported goods to markets opened by US-led globalization. Chinese students studied at American universities and brought back knowledge. Chinese technology firms entered systems shaped by US standards. Ironically, the very structures that secured America's power also enabled the growth of its greatest rival.
That irony is one of the great puzzles of our age. Can the same order that lifted America also accommodate China? Or does China's rise inevitably mean the decline of US dominance? To answer that, we need to look not only at history, but also at the rapid transformations of the last 4 decades. The story of US hegemony shows us the strengths and weaknesses of American power. It sets the stage for the question we now face: how this long-standing leader will respond to the fastest-rising challenger of modern times. When we turn our focus to China, we must begin in the late 1970s and early 1980s, because that was the true turning point. After decades of isolation and central planning under Mao Zedong, China was a poor and largely agrarian society. But with Deng Xiaoping's reforms, the country began to open its doors to the world. Deng's famous phrase, "It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice," symbolized a new pragmatism. Economic growth became the priority, and experimentation replaced rigid ideology.
Those reforms changed everything. The government allowed private enterprise to grow in certain sectors, foreign companies to invest in special economic zones, and farmers to sell surplus produce in markets. These small steps unlocked massive potential. Factories began to spring up along the eastern coast, first producing low-cost goods like textiles, toys, and electronics, and then gradually moving into more complex industries. By the 1990s, China was already being called the world's workshop. It exported cheap products at huge scale, and foreign companies found it nearly impossible to resist the lure of cheap labor.
The statistics tell the story better than words. For decades, China's economy grew at an average rate of nearly 10% per year, the fastest sustained expansion in modern history. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty, something the world had never seen before. Entire cities grew from small fishing villages into megacities. Shenzhen, once a sleepy town near Hong Kong, became a metropolis of more than 12 million people. Infrastructure projects reshaped the landscape, with highways, railroads, airports, and ports built at unprecedented speed.
But this miracle was not just about cheap labor. It was also about integration into global markets. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, a step that dramatically expanded its trade. Western companies shifted production to China, benefiting from its scale and efficiency. Global consumers enjoyed lower prices, while Chinese firms climbed the value chain, learning from foreign technology and practices. The trade balance shifted as the world became dependent on Chinese manufacturing, while China itself accumulated enormous foreign currency reserves.
What is fascinating is how this growth transformed not only the economy, but also society. Millions of Chinese moved from rural areas into cities, creating the largest wave of urbanization in history. A new middle class emerged, hungry for consumer goods, better education, and global connections. Universities expanded, young people studied abroad, and a generation of entrepreneurs began to think globally. Suddenly, China was no longer just a factory for others. It became a marketplace, an innovator, and a serious player in science, technology, and finance.
Technology is central to this transformation. In the 2000s and 2010s, Chinese companies like Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, and later ByteDance rose to global prominence. These firms were not simply copying Western models. They began innovating in areas like mobile payments, e-commerce, and social media. In many ways, China leapfrogged traditional stages of development. For example, while credit cards dominated in the West, mobile payment apps became the norm in China almost overnight. This shift demonstrated not just adaptation, but a new form of leadership in digital economies.
Manufacturing, however, remained the backbone. From steel and cement to electronics and solar panels, China built massive industries that dwarfed competitors. It became the largest trading partner for more than 120 countries. Supply chains ran through Chinese ports and factories, meaning that disruption in China could be felt across continents. The COVID-19 pandemic later reminded the world just how dependent it had become on Chinese production. Masks, medical equipment, and electronic parts were all tied to the Chinese economy, showing both the power and the vulnerability of globalization.
And with this economic rise came political influence. Wealth translated into power. China began investing heavily abroad, buying resources, companies, and infrastructure. Its Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, promised to connect Asia, Africa, and Europe with roads, railways, and ports funded by Chinese loans and built by Chinese firms. For developing nations, these investments looked like opportunities. For established powers, they looked like challenges because they expanded Beijing's reach far beyond its borders.
This growing power also changed how China presented itself. At first, it described its rise as peaceful, insisting it did not seek dominance but only development. Over time, however, its confidence grew. Chinese leaders began speaking of national rejuvenation, of restoring the country's rightful place as a great power after what they call a century of humiliation. This narrative resonated strongly at home and gave legitimacy to the ruling Communist Party. It was no longer only about economics, it was about pride, influence, and destiny.
The effects are clear today. China is the world's second-largest economy, and in some areas, it has already surpassed the United States. It is the largest exporter of goods, the biggest holder of foreign currency reserves, and a leader in areas like renewable energy. Its companies are setting global standards, and its government is shaping international debates. The transformation from a poor country in the 1970s to a near superpower today is nothing short of extraordinary, and it is precisely this transformation that has brought the rivalry with the United States to the forefront.
To summarize, China's rapid growth since the 1980s was not an accident. It was the result of reforms, integration into global markets, the rise of manufacturing, and later a shift into technology and innovation. This growth lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, created new global supply chains, and reshaped the balance of power. But most importantly, it turned economic strength into political influence, setting the stage for the great question of our time. How will the United States respond to a China that is no longer rising quietly, but demanding its place at the center of global affairs?
When we talk about global power, we cannot avoid the military dimension. For decades, the United States has been recognized as the most powerful military force on Earth. Its defense budget is larger than the next several countries combined, and its armed forces are stationed in more than 70 nations worldwide. The U.S. Navy operates aircraft carriers that patrol every ocean, while its Air Force maintains unmatched long-range capabilities. This global reach allows Washington not just to defend its homeland, but also to project power into every region of strategic interest.
China, however, has undergone a remarkable military transformation in just the last 2 decades. For much of the 20th century, its army was massive in size, but outdated in technology. That has changed. The People's Liberation Army has modernized at a speed that has surprised many observers. China now invests heavily in advanced missiles, naval fleets, cyber capabilities, and space technology. It no longer relies on sheer numbers. Instead, it is seeking precision, sophistication, and the ability to challenge U.S. dominance, especially in Asia.
The U.S. military strategy rests heavily on its network of alliances. NATO in Europe, bilateral treaties in Asia with Japan and South Korea, and newer frameworks like the Quad and AUKUS are all parts of this system. These alliances give Washington not only additional troops and bases, but also legitimacy for its actions. In crises, America rarely stands alone. This collective defense structure has been one of its greatest strengths, ensuring that its power is multiplied through partners who share both resources and risks.
China, in contrast, does not rely on alliances in the same way. Its strategy is based more on building dominance in its immediate neighborhood. The South China Sea has become a central theater. Beijing has built artificial islands, installed military bases, and expanded its naval patrols there. It claims territory disputed by several Southeast Asian nations and asserts that these waters are historically its own. At the same time, it has increased military pressure on Taiwan, an island it considers part of its sovereign territory. These moves reveal a regional focus rather than a global one.
Yet, this regional dominance has implications far beyond Asia. The South China Sea is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. Trillions of dollars in trade flow through it every year. If China were to control or even influence this space, it would gain enormous leverage over global commerce. That is why the United States has conducted freedom of navigation operations, sailing its warships close to the disputed islands to demonstrate that international waters cannot be claimed by one state. These operations underline Washington's role as the defender of open seas.
It is also important to note the new dimensions of competition. Cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, hypersonic missiles, and space-based technologies are no longer science fiction. Both the US and China are investing billions into these areas. China's launch of anti-satellite weapons and its advances in hypersonic glide vehicles have alarmed Pentagon planners. Meanwhile, the United States is upgrading its own nuclear arsenal and expanding its missile defense systems. This is not simply a competition of tanks and ships. It is about who controls the future technologies of war.
From a strategic perspective, the United States remains more globally oriented. It wants to maintain influence in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia simultaneously. Its military is structured for global engagement. China, on the other hand, is mostly focused on securing regional supremacy, though it is slowly extending its reach. For example, China has built its first overseas military base in Djibouti, near the Red Sea, and is rumored to be considering others in Africa and the Indian Ocean. These are small steps, but they indicate ambitions beyond its immediate borders.
Regional assertiveness also carries risks. China's growing naval presence has created tensions with countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. In response, many of these states have quietly deepened cooperation with the United States. This shows how aggressive moves can push neighbors into Washington's arms. At the same time, however, some countries welcome Chinese investment and try to balance between the two giants. The result is a complex regional chessboard where alliances and rivalries are constantly shifting.
So how does the military balance impact future power? The answer lies in credibility. A superpower is not only measured by its weapons, but by whether others believe it can deliver on promises of security. The U.S. demonstrates credibility through its alliance commitments and its ability to act quickly almost anywhere in the world. China demonstrates credibility through its rapid buildup and its willingness to push boundaries in its own region. Both approaches carry strengths and weaknesses, and both are shaping how smaller nations align themselves in the rivalry.
What we see then is a clash of two very different models. America is a global guarantor with worldwide commitments and a heavy reliance on allies. China is a rising regional power with ambitions to rewrite rules in its backyard and gradually extend its reach. If Washington succeeds in holding its alliances together, it will retain an edge. If Beijing succeeds in turning its regional dominance into global influence, the balance may shift. The outcome of this contest will define not only security in Asia, but the overall global order.
And that is why military power remains at the heart of the U.S.-China rivalry. Economic and technological competition matter deeply, but without credible military strength, those advantages cannot be fully protected. Washington knows this, and so does Beijing. As both sides continue to modernize, test limits, and shape strategies, the risk of confrontation grows. Whether through deterrence, alliances, or direct competition, the battle for global power is inseparable from the question of who controls the instruments of war.
Technology is not just a tool for modern life. It has become the battlefield where nations compete for power and influence. The United States and China both understand that whoever leads in technology will hold a central position in the global order. When we talk about artificial intelligence, 5G networks, semiconductors, or digital infrastructure, we are not only discussing innovation, but also security, control, and economic strength. In many ways, the race for technology is the real struggle for global power in the 21st century, and both countries are investing enormous resources to make sure they do not fall behind.
That is exactly right, Julia. Let us begin with artificial intelligence, or AI. AI is often called the new electricity because it powers almost every modern industry. China has declared its ambition to become the world leader in AI by 2030. With a huge population and massive access to data, Chinese companies and researchers have a natural advantage. Data is the fuel of AI, and in this sense, China is like an oil-rich country during the industrial age. The government is supporting AI development in security, healthcare, transport, and military technology. Meanwhile, the United States still leads in top research institutions, innovative companies, and software development, but the gap is slowly narrowing, and that worries Washington.
AI is only one area. The second great battleground is 5G. This is the next generation of mobile communication, and it promises faster internet, smarter cities, and stronger connections between machines and people. China's Huawei became the world leader in 5G technology, offering cheaper and advanced equipment to countries around the world. For the United States, this was a national security alarm. Washington argued that Huawei could act as a spy tool for Beijing, giving China access to sensitive information. Whether this is true or not, the perception itself created fear. The US and its allies then moved to ban Huawei and other Chinese companies from building their networks. This shows how much technology and geopolitics are now mixed together.
Yes, Julia. And then we arrive at the heart of today's technological rivalry: semiconductors. These small chips are the brains of all digital devices. From smartphones to satellites, nothing works without them. The United States and its partners, especially Taiwan and South Korea, control the most advanced chip-making technologies. China, on the other hand, relies heavily on imports, especially from Taiwan. This dependence makes China vulnerable. That is why Beijing is investing billions of dollars to build its own semiconductor industry. In response, the US launched sanctions to limit China's access to the most advanced chips and equipment. For example, Washington pressured the Netherlands to block sales of high-end machines used for chip manufacturing. This is not just economic competition. It is about keeping a rival away from the keys of global power.
Exactly. Technology is not only about companies, it is about global influence. Whoever builds the digital infrastructure of other countries gains long-term strategic power. For example, if Chinese companies build Africa's digital networks, Beijing could shape the flow of information, set technical standards, and even gather intelligence. The same logic applies when American firms dominate global cloud computing or software markets. In this sense, the world is being divided into two technological ecosystems, one led by the US, the other by China. Many countries are now forced to choose sides, or at least to balance carefully between them.
That raises the question of innovation. Historically, the United States has been the center of global innovation. Silicon Valley remains a symbol of creativity, risk-taking, and private investment. But China is catching up quickly with a different model. Beijing uses state-led planning, subsidies, and long-term vision to direct resources into strategic sectors. This top-down system is sometimes less flexible, but it allows China to concentrate power in areas like AI, quantum computing, green energy, and space technology. In some ways, we are seeing two different models of innovation competing with each other: the American free market style versus the Chinese state-driven approach.
And behind all of this lies a deeper question. Does technology now define what it means to be a superpower? In the Cold War, power was measured by nuclear weapons and military bases. Today, some argue that the winner of the AI race will control the global order. If a country dominates semiconductors, 5G, and digital platforms, it can shape economies, societies, and even the way people think. In that sense, the technological race is not only about economics, but also about the ability to set the rules of the future.
That is the real challenge. Can the United States stop China's rise in technology? Sanctions and restrictions can slow down progress, but they may also push China to become even more independent. History shows that nations under pressure often innovate faster. At the same time, can China truly replace the US in leading innovation, or will it remain dependent on foreign technologies? These are the questions policymakers ask every day. And for the rest of the world, the answer matters because technology is now the foundation of global leadership.
So perhaps we can end this section with a question for our listeners. Is technology the true key to global leadership, or is it only one part of the larger puzzle? Can either the United States or China really win this innovation race, or will the future be defined by interdependence and cooperation despite rivalry?
Economics has become one of the most visible and immediate arenas in the US-China rivalry. Over the past decade, trade conflicts have captured global attention. The United States, concerned about its growing trade deficit with China, imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. Washington argued that Beijing was engaging in unfair trade practices, including forced technology transfers, intellectual property theft, and state subsidies that gave Chinese companies an advantage in global markets. These tariffs were meant to push China toward fairer practices and to protect American jobs and industries.
China responded in kind. Beijing imposed tariffs on American goods, from soybeans to automobiles, aiming to pressure US producers and show that it would not be bullied. But trade wars go beyond tariffs. They affect global markets, supply chains, and investors' confidence. For example, when the US restricted access to certain high-tech components, Chinese companies had to find alternative suppliers or develop domestic capabilities. At the same time, China used other tools to deepen economic influence, particularly through its Belt and Road Initiative, which has become one of the most ambitious international infrastructure projects in history.
The Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, is central to understanding China's economic strategy. Launched in 2013, it focuses on building roads, railways, ports, and energy infrastructure across Asia, Africa, and Europe. For recipient countries, it promises investment and development, sometimes in regions that traditional Western donors have ignored. But critics argue that BRI also creates debt dependency and political influence, as countries borrow heavily from China and become tied to Beijing's economic and diplomatic interests. In essence, China uses economic tools to extend influence, shaping the global order without firing a single shot.
Currency also plays a role in this struggle. The US dollar has long been the world's reserve currency, giving Washington a powerful advantage in international trade and finance. China has been pushing for the renminbi to gain a more prominent global role, promoting it in trade agreements, international loans, and financial markets. While the renminbi has not yet matched the dollar in global dominance, its growing use shows Beijing's intention to challenge the financial status quo. Economic influence, therefore, is not only about trade volumes, but also about who controls the currency and financial infrastructure that underpin the global system.
Supply chains have become another critical battlefield. China dominates the production of many essential goods, from electronics and machinery to rare earth minerals used in high-tech industries. This dominance gives Beijing leverage over global markets, allowing it to influence prices and availability. During crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the world saw how disruption in Chinese production affected everything from medical supplies to automotive components. Control over supply chains has become a tool of geopolitical power, giving China an edge beyond traditional military or diplomatic strength.
Financial leverage is closely tied to this. With enormous foreign reserves and investment capacity, China can lend to countries or invest in infrastructure to secure both influence and economic return. This strategy has made countries in Africa, Asia, and even Europe more receptive to Chinese interests. The combination of trade, investment, and currency influence means China can shape economic outcomes far beyond its borders. Meanwhile, the United States still relies on its economic might, technological edge, and alliance network to counterbalance China's growing influence.
Trade conflicts illustrate how economics can become a weapon. Tariffs, export controls, investment restrictions, and sanctions are all methods used by the United States to slow China's rise or compel changes in its policies. China uses similar strategies through state-owned enterprises, loan conditions, and strategic investments in critical sectors abroad. Both countries recognize that global power is no longer determined solely by armies and missiles, but increasingly by who can control production, finance, and trade networks.
The result is a world where economics is inseparable from strategy. Policies about exports, tariffs, or infrastructure investment are simultaneously about wealth and influence. Each decision has implications for diplomacy, alliances, and even security. For smaller countries, this creates difficult choices, as they must navigate between the economic opportunities offered by China and the strategic expectations of the United States. Economics, in this sense, has become one of the most powerful instruments in the modern struggle for global leadership.
In conclusion, the economic dimension of the US-China rivalry shows that power is multidimensional. Trade wars, currency competition, control over supply chains, and global investment strategies all demonstrate how economic tools can be used to achieve political ends. Both nations are not simply competing for wealth, they are competing for influence, alliances, and the ability to shape the rules of international engagement. In this modern era, those who control the economy in key sectors can wield power on a global scale without firing a single shot.
When we discuss global power, it is not enough to focus on military strength or economic might. Ideology and culture, the concept known as soft power, play a crucial role in shaping long-term influence. For decades, the United States has promoted democracy, human rights, and free markets as universal ideals. Through international organizations, foreign aid, and cultural exports, America has built an image of itself as a beacon of freedom. Hollywood movies, music, technology, and universities have all reinforced the appeal of the US model around the globe.
That soft power has helped the United States gain allies and shape global narratives without using force. Countries often align with Washington because they admire its institutions, values, or innovation. American universities attract students from every continent who return home with skills, networks, and ideas shaped by U.S. culture. American films and media have exported not only entertainment, but also social norms, lifestyles, and political ideals. In many ways, the world has been persuaded by the attractiveness of American society as much as by its power.
However, China presents a very different approach. Beijing does not promote democracy or liberal norms in the traditional sense. Instead, it offers an alternative model: one-party rule, centralized control, and state-guided economic development. Through institutions such as Confucius Institutes, Chinese media outlets, and global infrastructure initiatives, China spreads its narrative of stability, development, and modernity. The message is clear: strong governance and economic growth can be more important than Western-style political freedoms, especially for countries struggling with development challenges.
China's soft power relies on a combination of culture, education, and media. Its media outlets broadcast news to foreign audiences, often emphasizing China's achievements and global contributions. Chinese universities welcome international students with scholarships, while partnerships with foreign institutions increase academic influence. Films, television series, and social media apps like TikTok project aspects of Chinese culture worldwide. These efforts are designed not just to inform, but to subtly shape perceptions of China as a capable, modern, and responsible global power.
The contrast between US and Chinese soft power is fascinating. America relies on openness, creativity, and ideological appeal, whereas China relies on controlled messaging, practical success, and infrastructure-driven influence. For example, US media often presents a liberal perspective emphasizing freedom and human rights, while Chinese media emphasizes collective achievement, economic growth, and national sovereignty. Both approaches aim to make the world more receptive to their respective visions of governance and global order.
Soft power also intersects with strategic objectives. For the United States, spreading democracy and freedom reinforces alliances and global legitimacy. For China, promoting its governance model helps normalize its rise, gain influence in developing nations, and reduce opposition to its policies. Both nations recognize that long-term legitimacy is not solely achieved through coercion. It must be earned through perception, culture, and persuasion. This is why education, media, and public diplomacy are increasingly seen as critical components of global strategy.
Consider the global competition in higher education. US universities remain top-ranked, attracting talent and influencing global research trends. China, however, is rapidly expanding its educational influence through partnerships, scholarships, and research initiatives. Similarly, cultural exports, from films and music to social media platforms, allow both nations to shape global tastes, ideas, and values. The narrative each country tells about itself can determine which model other nations find attractive or worth emulating.
The critical question becomes whether soft power can shape long-term legitimacy. Military might or economic clout can secure influence temporarily, but ideas endure over decades and generations. If people admire a nation's values, they are more likely to support its leadership in international affairs. This is why both the United States and China invest so heavily in cultural diplomacy, media presence, and global narratives. A country that fails in soft power may struggle to maintain global influence even if it is economically or militarily strong.
Ultimately, the battle of ideology and culture is subtle but profound. It is about convincing others that your system, your ideas, and your vision of the future are credible, attractive, and sustainable. The United States emphasizes democracy, freedom, and innovation, while China emphasizes order, economic development, and national rejuvenation. Both seek legitimacy on the world stage, but through very different means. The question for the 21st century is which approach will resonate more effectively across the globe, and how this will shape the emerging balance of power.
When we examine global power, one of the most important factors is alliances and partnerships. The United States has built a network of alliances that extend across Europe, Asia, and beyond. NATO, for example, remains the cornerstone of Western security, uniting dozens of countries under a collective defense agreement. In Asia, frameworks like the Quad, comprising the US, Japan, India, and Australia, and security partnerships such as AUKUS with the United Kingdom and Australia, strengthen Washington's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. These alliances allow the US to project power far beyond its borders.
China, in contrast, approaches partnerships differently. Rather than relying on formal military alliances, Beijing focuses on building strong bilateral and multilateral relationships, particularly in its neighborhood and in developing regions. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has forged economic ties across Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe, linking infrastructure investment with political influence. China also maintains close partnerships with countries such as Pakistan, Russia, and several African nations, offering development aid, trade opportunities, and diplomatic support. These relationships extend China's reach without the formal obligations of alliances.
Alliances are not only about cooperation, but also deterrence. NATO, for instance, acts as a powerful signal to potential adversaries that any attack on a member will meet collective resistance. Similarly, U.S. security partnerships in Asia serve as a counterbalance to China's regional ambitions. Japan and South Korea rely on U.S. protection against North Korea and potential Chinese aggression. Australia plays a strategic role in monitoring the South China Sea and ensuring freedom of navigation. By building these alliances, Washington multiplies its influence while sharing the burden of regional security.
China's partnerships, while less formal, are increasingly strategic. In Africa, for example, Chinese investment in ports, railways, and power plants creates dependencies that may translate into political influence. In Asia, partnerships with countries such as Pakistan and Cambodia help China project power in areas near India and Southeast Asia. Even without military alliances, Beijing can rely on these networks to secure its interests, gain diplomatic support, and influence regional outcomes. These ties allow China to expand its presence without committing to defense obligations that could limit flexibility.
Contested regions are where these alliances and partnerships become most visible. The South China Sea, with its rich shipping lanes and disputed territories, is a critical flashpoint. U.S. forces conduct freedom of navigation operations, often alongside allies like Japan and Australia, to challenge China's territorial claims. Similarly, Taiwan is another critical test case. The United States has pledged support through arms sales and informal security guarantees, while China asserts its claim over the island. The stability and alignment of allies in these regions are decisive for how potential conflicts might unfold.
Africa is another emerging arena for influence. While the US maintains relationships with African nations, China has become a dominant investor, providing loans, building infrastructure, and engaging in trade agreements. This presence allows China to gain political support in international forums and secure access to critical resources. The US has responded with development aid, trade initiatives, and military cooperation. But China's economic strategy often provides more immediate and visible benefits for recipient countries, enhancing its soft power alongside strategic influence.
The balance of global power increasingly depends on the credibility and cohesion of alliances. If U.S. allies trust Washington's commitments and continue to act in coordination, the United States maintains a strong edge. However, if alliances weaken due to internal disagreements, competing interests, or doubts about U.S. reliability, China can exploit those gaps. Conversely, Beijing's approach relies on cultivating dependence and goodwill, which can be more flexible but potentially less binding during crises. Both strategies have strengths and vulnerabilities that shape the global balance.
In short, alliances and partnerships are central to global strategy. For the United States, formal alliances provide security, legitimacy, and the ability to project power widely. For China, strategic partnerships expand influence and secure resources while avoiding binding commitments. Contested regions like the South China Sea, Taiwan, and Africa illustrate how these alliances and networks interact with national ambitions. Ultimately, the configuration, reliability, and credibility of alliances could determine whether the US can maintain its position or whether China continues to rise as a dominant global actor.
As we look forward, it is clear that the 21st century will be shaped not only by military capabilities or economic strength, but also by the relationships countries build. Alliances, partnerships, and networks of influence will determine access to key regions, resources, and global decision-making. Both the United States and China understand that power is amplified through collaboration, yet it is constrained when trust erodes or commitments falter. The interplay of these alliances may be as decisive as any technological or economic advantage.
When discussing global power, it is essential to consider not only strengths, but also risks and criticisms. China, for example, has faced repeated accusations of debt diplomacy. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China loans massive sums to developing countries to build infrastructure. While these projects bring roads, ports, and railways, they can also create enormous debt burdens. Critics argue that this financial leverage allows Beijing to extract political concessions or influence domestic policy, raising concerns that economic assistance comes with strings attached.
Indeed, Julia. On the other hand, the United States faces its own critiques. Over the past decades, America has often been accused of overreach, involving itself in conflicts far from its borders. From military interventions in the Middle East to sanctions that impact civilian populations, critics argue that the U.S. sometimes applies double standards. Washington champions democracy and human rights, but maintains alliances or tolerates actions by partners that contradict these principles. This perception has fueled resentment and skepticism toward American leadership, even among close allies.
China's internal governance model also attracts criticism. While its one-party system allows for long-term planning and rapid decision-making, it limits political freedoms, restricts dissent, and controls media narratives. These practices raise questions about transparency, accountability, and the human costs of rapid development. Critics argue that economic success alone cannot justify authoritarianism, and global observers worry that exporting this model might undermine democratic norms in other nations. The combination of economic influence and authoritarian governance has made China a polarizing figure on the world stage.
Similarly, the United States' approach sometimes fuels global distrust. Its reliance on military interventions, sanctions, and economic pressure can be perceived as coercive or self-serving. Countries may question whether Washington prioritizes its national interests over global stability or fairness. Instances of perceived hypocrisy, where the U.S. criticizes some nations while overlooking similar behavior by allies, have weakened moral authority in international forums. These factors have prompted some countries to seek more neutral or diversified foreign policies, balancing relations with both Washington and Beijing.
The consequences of these criticisms are significant. For China, aggressive lending and assertive regional policies create suspicion among neighboring states. Countries dependent on Chinese loans may worry about sovereignty and economic vulnerability. In Africa, Asia, and parts of Europe, nations evaluate carefully whether cooperation with Beijing brings benefits or risks. Even when projects succeed economically, the perception of coercion or dependence can reduce trust and complicate long-term partnerships. Global perception matters just as much as actual power.
The United States faces similar challenges in managing perceptions. Military power and economic sanctions are tools of influence, but overuse or inconsistent application can erode credibility. Allies may question U.S. reliability, and neutral countries may resist taking sides. This global distrust complicates diplomacy, trade, and security arrangements. In some cases, excessive reliance on coercion or unilateral actions may even provoke counter-alliances, inadvertently strengthening the position of rivals like China, who are ready to exploit perceived weaknesses in U.S. strategy.
Another critical issue is the risk of escalation. Competition between the United States and China spans multiple domains: military, economic, technological, and ideological. Miscalculations or misunderstandings in any of these areas could lead to conflict. For example, tensions in the South China Sea, Taiwan, or cyber domains could rapidly escalate if either side misreads intentions or overreacts. Both powers are aware of these risks, but the interconnectedness of their economies and militaries means that even minor incidents could have global repercussions.
Global instability is a further concern. If both powers pursue maximum advantage without coordination or restraint, smaller nations may be forced to take sides, supply chains could fracture, and international norms could erode. The world has already witnessed economic shocks and diplomatic tensions arising from trade disputes, sanctions, and military posturing. The balance between competition and cooperation becomes vital. Unchecked rivalry threatens not only the U.S. and China, but also the broader stability of the international system, impacting trade, security, and human well-being worldwide.
Ultimately, the criticisms of both China and the United States reflect the complexities of global leadership. No power is flawless. China's rise brings economic opportunity, but also coercion and authoritarian control. The US maintains influence and credibility, but sometimes projects power inconsistently and faces moral challenges. Recognizing the risks and learning from critiques is essential for both powers, as missteps can amplify tensions, undermine trust, and create conditions for conflict or instability.
This brings us to an important reflection. Power is not only about capabilities, but also about legitimacy and trust. Without global support or perceived fairness, even the most powerful nations may struggle to maintain influence. Both the United States and China must navigate a world that is watching closely, aware of their actions and consequences. In the coming decades, their ability to manage criticisms, avoid escalation, and build confidence among other nations may define not only their rivalry, but the stability and prosperity of the global order itself. As we reach the conclusion of our discussion, it becomes clear that the question of who will dominate the 21st century is far from simple. The United States and China represent two distinct models of power, each with unique strengths, strategies, and global ambitions. Washington wields extensive alliances, unmatched military reach, and a history of innovation and cultural influence. Beijing, on the other hand, leverages rapid economic growth, regional dominance, and a highly coordinated approach to technology, infrastructure, and global partnerships. The contrast between them is stark, and understanding it requires examining not only their capabilities, but also the choices they make in diplomacy, trade, and culture.
Indeed, Adam. Our discussion has covered a wide range of arenas: military competition, economic influence, technology, ideology, and alliances. Each of these areas represents a front in the broader struggle for global power. The United States has historically relied on its global presence, soft power, and multilateral structures to maintain influence. China focuses on economic leverage, regional strength, and alternative governance models. Both nations are adapting, innovating, and expanding their reach, but the strategies they pursue reflect their histories, priorities, and visions for the world.
A key takeaway is that power today is multidimensional. It is no longer determined solely by military might or economic size. Influence now depends on technological leadership, cultural appeal, diplomatic skill, and the ability to shape global norms and narratives. The United States has advantages in technological innovation and soft power, while China excels in strategic planning, infrastructure development, and economic leverage. Both are formidable in different ways, and their competition will shape international relations for decades to come.
However, the future is not predetermined. While both powers are growing increasingly aware of the stakes, they must also navigate risks, criticisms, and global perceptions. China must address concerns about debt diplomacy and authoritarian governance, while the United States must manage the consequences of overreach and perceived double standards. Missteps by either side could create instability, economic disruption, or even conflict. The challenge lies in balancing ambition with caution, assertiveness with diplomacy, and competition with cooperation where possible.
Alliances and partnerships will play a decisive role. The United States depends on NATO, the Quad, AUKUS, and other formal arrangements to maintain influence. China relies on economic ties, regional partnerships, and strategic investments to extend its reach. Contested regions such as the South China Sea, Taiwan, and Africa will continue to test these networks. Smaller nations must navigate carefully between the two powers, and their choices could shape the balance of global influence. Alliances, credibility, and trust will be as critical as economic or military strength.
Soft power and ideology also matter greatly. Cultural influence, education, media, and the attractiveness of governance models shape perceptions and legitimacy. The US promotes democracy, innovation, and freedom, while China highlights stability, economic growth, and state-led success. Both strategies aim to persuade global audiences, build alliances, and ensure long-term influence. How other countries perceive these models may determine whether leadership is achieved through admiration, coercion, or a combination of both.
Technology remains another decisive battlefield. Artificial intelligence, 5G, semiconductors, and digital infrastructure define the capacity to innovate, control critical industries, and influence global systems. The United States retains an edge in research, creativity, and global networks, while China is catching up through state-driven innovation and strategic investments. This race for technological supremacy will shape the future of military capabilities, economic dominance, and even cultural influence, making it one of the most important dimensions of the US-China competition.
Finally, it is essential to remember the human and global consequences of this rivalry. Trade wars, sanctions, debt diplomacy, and military tensions all affect ordinary citizens, economic stability, and international peace. The 21st century will be shaped not only by the ambitions of superpowers, but also by the responses of smaller nations, global institutions, and civil society. Managing competition responsibly, avoiding escalation, and finding avenues for cooperation where interests align may ultimately determine whether the future is stable or volatile.
In conclusion, dear listeners, the battle for global power between the United States and China is a complex, multifaceted, and ongoing process. There are no simple answers, and victory is not measured merely by GDP, military budgets, or technological achievements. Legitimacy, alliances, perception, and long-term strategy all matter. The world is watching closely, and the decisions made today will shape the political, economic, and technological landscape for generations.
We leave you with critical questions to consider. Can money, technology, or military strength alone buy long-term legitimacy? Will alliances and soft power determine who leads the 21st century? Or will global interdependence force cooperation despite rivalry? These questions are not easy, but they are essential for understanding the future of international relations and the balance of global power.
Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration. We hope this discussion has given you insights into the complexities of global leadership, the strategies of the United States and China, and the challenges that lie ahead. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you are listening from and your perspective on this rivalry. Your engagement is vital for understanding how people around the world view this defining struggle.
And remember, knowledge and informed discussion are the first steps toward understanding our rapidly changing world. Whether you are a student of international relations, a curious observer, or someone interested in global affairs, reflecting on these dynamics helps us all anticipate and prepare for the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and share it with anyone interested in understanding the US-China rivalry. The conversation does not end here. It continues every day in boardrooms, parliaments, universities, and homes around the world. By staying informed, you are part of the discussion shaping the future of global power.
Thank you again for listening, and we hope you join us for future episodes as we explore other critical questions shaping our world. The battle for global influence is ongoing, and understanding it is essential for anyone who wants to engage with the realities of international politics, economics, and technology in the 21st century.